The St. Lawrence Seaway opened to navigation in 1959, linking the Great Lakes to the Atlantic Ocean. Aboard the Royal Yacht Britannia, Queen Elizabeth II and U.S. President Dwight D. Eisenhower formally opened the Seaway with a short cruise after addressing the crowds in St. Lambert, Quebec on April 25, 1959. The yacht passed Kahnawake shores as some Kahnawake Hrono lined the banks of the Seaway.
Being too young at the time maybe to understand that, the only thing I understood was it was so difficult now to get to where we used to go all the time, where we enjoyed ourselves. And instead there was these big, huge ships that were going back and forth. I remember when the Queen passed, they took us out of school, we all had to line up on the side of the Seaway, we were waving little Union Jacks. We didn't understand what we were doing. Today maybe we'd do something different, I don't know. I suppose we would, but back then it was a day out of school, it was adventure, you know.
And all of a sudden, these RC and Peter were in full dress, and he put his fingers in his mouth and he whistled. And he whistled. So we were like, we're laying on the rocks, we sat up, we looked, and he went like this. So we all jumped in the water and we swam back. He says, you can't go back there. He said, because the Queen's ship is coming and nobody can be on the other side. So us, we're just looking at each other and we're saying, like, what? Do they think we're going to kill the Queen or what? You know, when you're kids, you don't think about these things, you know, and just kind of wonder what the heck is their problem. So we came back and I never went back. Never. Turned my back on the river and I left.
The opening of the St. Lawrence Seaway was not a joyous occasion for everyone. The idea of building some type of large waterway to accommodate larger ships was in the works for at least 100 years before the Seaway construction, according to one Kahnawake man.
It's a sore point in my life. It arouses anger every time I think about it and talk about it, and about the way that the methodology used to accomplish what the federal government wanted to do. I guess the history and knowledge of the Seaway is tied with the Lachine Canal. The Lachine Canal, according to the oral tradition on the street at home, was completed in about 1932. And right away they dreamt of the engineers and the country and whatever, dreamt of someday building a larger seaway, or not seaway at the time, but a canal to accommodate larger ships. And so that was the concept that was in the back of the minds of politicians and other people for over 100 years.
Andrew DeLille Sr. was a teen in the late 1940s and realized that the Seaway was on the horizon while he was a summer student on Kahnawake's roads and water systems.
My dad was responsible for building roads in Kahnawake, and he was responsible for taking care of the waterways, and he was responsible for taking care of the pumps and wells that we had, community wells, and we helped them repair it. We had worked on the roads. And one day they were given the job to put a water system in along the old road, along the church, and we were wondering why they chose that place. All of a sudden they came around, they said, we're going to put a water system in, water pipe and water. And they told us that, they said, well, the river is getting polluted and it might pollute your wells, so we have to start putting water away. And, and they said, I guess that was why the first part was near the river. And so we did it, and I was working for my dad. I helped them lay the pipes. At that time, we didn't have very much equipment. We used horses to haul the pipes, and we used manual to lay the pipes and all that. And anyway, I was part of that in the summer that they did that. And eventually I found out that, I guess, thinking about that, I said, geez, they had something in mind, and which was they suddenly announced the Seaway coming into being.
Historical documents state that Indian and Northern Affairs Canada and the Department of Transport began discussions on the Seaway construction in early 1954 and brought the MCK into the conversations in June of 1954. The St. Lawrence Seaway Authority's first expropriations began in 1955 when they took 1,262 acres, approximately 10% of Kahnawake land. Daniel Ruick is a PhD student at McGill University, interested in the history of environments, Indigenous people, and the history of Quebec and North America in general.
Well, it's the most, in terms of in the environmental history of Kahnawake, it's the most disruptive event that the community has ever faced. Some of the other expropriations, the different railroads that came through were also disruptive, and the bridges that were built were also disruptive, but there was nothing like the Seaway in terms of its disruptive character. It really changed people's relationship to the river. It changed how people felt about their village, and I think it was collectively perceived as the greatest tragedy that the village had ever experienced.
For many Kahnawake Hronu, the river was used for recreation, swimming, fishing, snaring and netting, boating, picking berries and apples, washing clothes, family picnics, drinking water, a grazing area and watering hole for animals, and a place to socialize. The river was the center of family life. Occurring over 55 years ago means that some of today's elders were just children or teenagers when the Seaway came through.
What I can really remember before the Seaway came was, of course, the river. I think that anyone you would approach would say the same thing as I'm going to say. There was something that was really, really missed. I remember going swimming there. This was by the CPR bridge, you know, at that far end. That was the best place for swimming. And I can remember going there as a child, as a teenager, and I have so many fond memories of the river because that was like a meeting place. I mean, in the summer, it would be crowded with people, just packed with people, and some of the people would be bringing their lunches. They'd have their blankets laid out, and the swimming was great because the water, you know, the rocks were so flat that you would almost think that it was laid there on purpose.
And then it extended to what we call the flat rocks. Flat rocks was an area where the water passed fast, but in a certain time of the year it went down and it was nice and calm and everybody had their picnics there. And there you were right in front of berry bushes, strawberry, raspberry, blueberry, and people used to pick there. It was a big abundance of those things, and people used to bring their lunch that area too.
And it wasn't just a small piece, they were great big pieces. And no matter how many people were swimming there, it never became murky, you know. It was always clean water. And you were able to drink from that very water in those days because nothing was polluted in those days. And twice a day there used to be a cruise ship that would come by. One would come by at 2 o'clock and the other one would come by at 4 o'clock. And I only remember one of the ship's names was Rapids Prince. And we would all be waiting for the ship to pass, because when the ship passed, and then it would bring those big waves toward shore, and that's where everybody would jump in, and they'd be screaming and hollering. Everybody was having such a wonderful time. And it was just wonderful.
I remember it very well. It's still painful to see what's left of my childhood haunts, to use the word. It's quite ironic to use the word haunt. but I think it suits this situation, because it does haunt me. When I reflect back as a young child, I used to be by the river almost every day during the summer.
I remember the hospital, the old hospital, and the front of it, where the wharf used to be. I remember how that used to look. I can remember behind the church, that hill is still there, but at the bottom of the hill that's where the beach area used to be, like the water line. Now the wall is there for the Seaway. I remember that area. I remember the point, and Johnson's Beach too. I remember going swimming there. We weren't allowed to be at the wharf, but there's pictures of my brother and I at the wharf, and we weren't supposed to be there. And the point, I can remember all those flat rocks where we all used to swim.
It breaks your heart, breaks my heart to see that. The way I used to live on in that area, I used to fish, I used to go boating, I used to swim there, I used to go there to wash. My family used to go there to wash their clothes, and I used to put water in a tank and sell it to the community because we had horses, and we sold water from there. In the winter time, we dug holes in the ice to sell water, to provide for the community. And and a lot of other people did that, so it was a loss. And I'm just talking a small area, maybe it's about a mile long of the waterway that we lost, or not even a mile long, and that was a real area of a lot of activity.
But we're going to Johnson's Beach, and when we were there, all the other mothers would take care of us. It was late Doris White, Brian's mother, Evelyn, all the mothers would be there. And at that time, everybody had large families. It could have been 15 or 20 kids. We didn't know. Nobody counted. And everybody played there and stayed there all day. And the women kept us in line. Nobody bothered us. We did not get hurt. It just didn't exist. And when it came time to eat, they bring and feed everybody. Everybody had bologna and kick sandwiches. Bologna sandwiches and kick. And that was it. So, we were happy. We just spent our entire summer. It was just like one big playground. There were no stores to go to and no money. But if you wanted apples, it was there. If you wanted berries, it was there. Anything you needed was there. And we could go the entire day like this.
I know there was one field in, I guess it would be the eastern part of the farm, where my father used to plant peas. And there was also corn. And there was also, I can recall, what we called a raspberry patch. It was a little area where there must have been, I don't know, maybe 50 raspberry plants. And you go pick raspberries in the summer, and they were so good, delicious and sweet. And I remember my mother giving me a pail and say, "Can you go pick some raspberries?" And I said, "Sure." I go pick raspberries, and I come back in, and she'll say, "Were they good?" By that she mean I'm supposed to be picking them. I'll say, "Oh yeah, they were good." I guess I couldn't hide the fact that I ate some because I had a little bit of red around on my lips.
Fishing and farming along the riverside were plentiful.
That's where I grew up. Because that's where we had our house, we had our farm. I can remember, I could still very vividly see the house. We had a shed, 2 sheds in fact. And then there was, that back then we didn't have electricity, we didn't have running water. There was an outhouse, there was a well, there was a big barn. We had, if I can recall, we had two horses, and I think 3 cows. And of course, every year we had pigs and chickens also.
We had a barn. We kept horses, a cow, chickens, and then on this side of it was a garden, a fair-sized garden, maybe 30 by 20, or maybe a little larger. And there my mother and father planted the crops, tomatoes and vegetables, pole beans, etc. You know, the fishing was tremendous, and you could just go out on the river and get your supper anytime that you wanted to, because the fishing was so plentiful. There was all kind of thriving things that were going on that was part and parcel of the community and the river before the Seaway.
My parents, when they got married and started their lives, they started in that area, and there was an island there. I don't know if there was a name for it or what. We just call it Kahnawake, which is the island. They started their life there in the summer. He owned the island. I don't know how he got it, but he owned it. That I don't even remember. And they used to plant, stay there in the summer, they would plant, and he would do all his fishing, netting, whatever. That was all he ever did. He was like he even used to experiment on crossbreeding seeds, and he would create other kinds of beans or whatever, you know. He was always into all of that. That's how he was raised, so that's how he lived and was raising us the same way. So my mother tells the story, used to tell the story about how when they started to plant, they had this old plow, push plow, and she was like the horse. She pulled the plow and my father would push it, and they would make their rows. That's how hard they worked to provide food for their family.
It basically cut off the community from the river, and the river was the life's blood of the community all along this shoreline. I mean, we've made it. I just don't think that people, when they put the Seaway to, it's a key word here, they didn't understand the respect for the land, and because we're using the word respect, is that as a community we learned how to respect each other. As people, we got along with people, and when the Seaway came through, all of a sudden it was splitting. It was divide and conquer.
My father was quite upset. I know that. I know he wasn't happy because he was a fisherman. He lived by the river. As a matter of fact, when my parents first got married, they had what they called a fishing camp right on the river, and they lived there during the summertime, you know, during the summer months, and enjoyed the fishing and that kind of life. And he had boats and he had nets. Him and some other men from the community who enjoyed themselves very much doing that, and that was part of their living too. So I heard him talk about it, my mother talk about how shameful it was that they lost access to the river. Things weren't the way they used to be, where that was part of their life. It was part of our culture.
That went on, you know, that lifestyle went on for a while, and we talk about it today, my brothers and sisters, and it's like we laugh because we said, we never thought it was dangerous or anything, but he had this little rowboat, and he'd put us all in there, in the river, no life jacket, nothing, and he'd be rowing up the river, and the boat was sticking out this much out of the water, just the rim of the boat. We had no fear, you know. That was, to us, the river was our life.
The catfish, all along where the bank is, way to the little tunnel that we went underneath in the springtime, all the catfish, you see all people with lanterns fishing, and the fish taste so good. They were small and they really taste the way it should taste. The ones in the farms there they have, the catfish, don't taste the same.
And in the springtime, this time of the year, we'd go along there as little kids, and we had with our older brothers and parents, you know, and perhaps grandparents, whoever. They would go in the water and they'd catch bullheads. They catch it by hand. They'd stick their hand in the mud and feel around for them. They take them out and they just throw them on the shore. And we put them in a potato bag and put them in the wagon. My older brother and I, Pidgey, we'd do that as little kids, you know. So, you know, those are memories that stick in your head, and then suddenly that was gone, bang, you know. We could no longer do that anymore, and that was very enjoyable.
In those days, the kids had a hard time understanding what was going on and how the Seaway would impact their lives in later years. What they knew was that there was a big hole being dug and that it was fun to play in the area and watch the men work.
When you're a young boy, you don't realize the impact of it right away. As you grow up, then you realize, like I said, my grandfather lived on a part that was expropriated. It was a big thing. You walk down there, and he had his own garden. He was already in his 70s. He had his own self-sufficiency. He had a garden, he had cows, he had horses, and he still ride his horses in the buggy and all that. I guess he was like a community elder, and they would come and talk to him, and they were always talking about, you know, the canal and this and that. I didn't really know what they were talking about, but I would sit there and listen, and they would all explain. And then one day they said, my mother said, well, they have to move Luggety's house. I said, where's he gonna live? She said, well, one of her brothers fixed him up a small house, and I watched them bring that by horses, and they brought him a small house, and he was gonna live in there. My grandmother by then had passed on, and so those were like good memories, but at the same time, you don't know why people have to move.
Well, I remember it was very busy because, you know, where I live, close to the river. I live right now in my grandmother's house, my Grandma Johnson's house, across from Alwyn's, and Alwyn's house wasn't there, Alwyn Moore's. It was just trucks busy all day, all night, blasting going on. My mom said, make sure you tell them that your grandfather was working in his garden and a big rock landed right next to him in the garden. He could have been killed. So she said, I want people to know that they didn't take all the precautions that they could have taken. She said, when they were building the Seaway, because they had to do blasting and digging, and it was like a major monumental project. And to look back, it's like we're little kids, it was like humongous, you know, never saw that much activity, especially near the river. But we didn't realize that once that would stop, that would forever take us away from the river.
What used to be a nice field that I used to cross as a child to reach the river was slowly removed, foot by foot by foot, until it was a giant empty trench. And that didn't stop us. We continued crossing that trench, climbing down one wall, getting to the bottom, crossing the bottom, which had some water in it, rainwater and mud. It was like sandy, muddy bottom, swampy, whatever. But we crossed it. It looked like it was a mile deep as a young child. But, you know, in reality, as I know now, it's closer to 35 feet to the bottom. You know, once the Seaway was, in fact, being used and ships were crossing daily both ways, well, we still, you know, either swam across or floated across the Seaway to get to the river. But as years went by, it started to die out. People just it was too hard. It wasn't the same. It was dangerous and this and that. So we start stepping back, and the next thing you know, we created a beachfront on the Seaway. And the Seaway became our swimming source or our swimming hole, whatever. And that was pretty awful because it was contaminated, and we didn't know, or we didn't care, because all we wanted to do was swim and picnic.
Back then we were kids, we adapted, you know, and the first year before they actually filled it up, that was probably the most fun we ever had because there was no water in it. So it was like the highest slide you can imagine with all boulders sticking out. And when we got one of those aluminum flying saucers, and would go down there and hit a rock and would just go flying. But to us, it was like, I guess what do you call that, Mount Royal? Mount Royal at our doorstep. Then the following year, they filled it up, and then that was it. You know, they opened the Seaway, and the only place we had was Johnson's Beach. That was the only place that we had access to. Everything else was interrupted by the Seaway.
But we got to see some massive trucks and toys. And so we got little trucks and we played as little kids did, 14, 15 years old, with trucks and cars, and pretended we were building our own Seaway. Because we really had no idea what the Seaway would do. There's never been a Seaway before, so, you know, and people would just say, it's Seaway. Well, okay, it's a Seaway. What does that mean? And I said, well, there's gonna be a locks, and we didn't know what the locks meant. Didn't realize. There was no comparison for us to look at.
It was a little exciting for me because I didn't know the damage it was doing, but the workers would say, hey, little boy, want to go get us some sodas? And, you know, they give me $1, and well, you get about 10 sodas, give me 10 cents or 15 cents, I was happy. Riding my bike, watching all this.
After Kahnawake lands were expropriated and construction of the Seaway began, the lives of some fishermen, hunters, and trappers were turned upside down.
My father had a job as a watchman for some time, so my mother said that was a good thing. You know, he'd go make sure that nobody steals the dynamite, I guess, or nobody does any damage, vandalism to all the trucks that were there and all the machinery. That after that, though, she said after it all got quiet and he didn't have a job anymore, she said he sort of went like into a depression. And she said a lot of the people went into a depression. All of a sudden they realized they can't bring a boat, there's no way to put their boat in the water. Before they would just bring it down or leave it by the shore. You'll see that in some of our historic photos where all the boats, nobody touched them. They'd all be left down by the shore.
I remember my father at one point, because he used to hunt and fish and trap and all of that, he actually got stopped and wasn't arrested, but had his traps and his gun and his whatever game he had confiscated. And that was just on the other side of the tunnel. You know, not somewhere way out, because all of that land had all been expropriated now. And it belonged to somebody else. And, you know, you had to follow the rules and regulations of I guess, the province at that time. And there was a game warden waiting right there. And my father, along with several other people, were stopped. And they had everything taken away from them. And they were told, you know, if you go to court, you'll have to pay a fine, and you know, and I think it was $6 for the fine and $2 to get a license, and you'll get all your equipment back. He said, "The hell with that?" He says, "Keep it. I don't want it." He said, "I'm not going to pay, but I'm going to keep on hunting and trapping," and he did. And he did, and he was never bothered again, from what I recall. You know, growing up later on and being with him to hunt and to fish and trap and all that.
In addition to hunting and fishing, agriculture was abundant on the land that was taken for the Seaway. Many Kahnawake Hronu planted and harvested their crops for their own family's sustenance. Others, with an entrepreneurial spirit, sold some of their produce or dairy products to neighbors and or to surrounding communities.
We can help, and yeah, cows, horses, pigs, everything, chicken and all that stuff. And we used to help to my grandfather do anything what he does, feed the cows, cut wood, milk the cows too, and everything what he had, plant, work in the garden. At the end of the year, everything was, wanted to pick tomatoes or whatever he had to sell it and bring it to La Prairie with the horse and buggy. Take all the stuff from there and bring it there for, they canned the stuff, tomatoes and mostly all tomatoes but he had a big garden. Even to milk the cow, we separate the milk and the cream. And then, I don't know if you remember Primo. He used to collect cream. He makes butter. And we separate the milk and the cream. My grandfather helped him to put in 5-gallon containers. Sometimes you had about 3 or 4 containers. And we used to take it from the house to the road and wait for the primo to come around to collect the cream. So whatever they want, they buy butter or cheese or something. They get it off him. Then they weren't paying much, just enough to make a few dollars. My grandfather.
In the summertime, we planted. We done everything for the winter. We put everything away and we plant. And then for the winter, that's how we did. I don't remember selling it. We kept everything ourselves for the winter. We had cows, we had about 15 cows, and we milked them all in the morning and night. So we never had a chance to do anything else but the farm. Oh, I remembered we worked. That's all I remember was work. Kill the bugs out the potatoes. Rows and rows of potatoes. We killed them, and there was a lot of bugs them days. Now they don't have bugs. You don't see any. Of course, nobody has potatoes, eh?
My grandmother's spare money was selling string beans and coming into the village with a big mountain of string beans, and she'd just go down the street and everybody'd come and buy their stuff by the 10 cents a dish or something. Usually by noontime she sold everything, and then she'd go and get her whatever she needed, from the store, or she'd go to Montreal or whatever it is to go get what she needed. And, that was their I guess that was their income. Whenever there's something they sold what they had, it's like watching Little House on the Prairie. That was the same kind of a lifestyle that they were living at the time.
One farm in particular became one of Kahnawage's biggest employers. The Bordeaux farm was located on the most eastern part of Kahnawake, north of the present survival school site. Besides raising farm animals like cows, chickens, pigs, horses, and a dog, the Bordeaux farm also cultivated large fields of various types of vegetables. Many Kahnawake Hronu were hired to pick and pack the produce, ready for delivery and sale to a large grocery store chain.
Well, we used to go work on the Bordeaux farm in the summer, that big farm, and used to hire the people from the village, so we had a place to go make money, a little money. String beans all day long, you're picking by the bag, burlap bag. But to me, that was the greatest days of my life. I was about 14, and them days you get $1, it's like a lot. You go and you buy a big bottle of Jumbo for $10. So, you go a long ways with your $1. And he hired a lot of people. They were good people, the Bordeaux. At lunchtime, they play music for you, and she feeds the people. She makes big pots of soup, sandwiches.
I can remember when we had big fields of rhubarb. The Bordeaux farm was known for that because people used to go there. They would be hired. They would pick the rhubarb, and they would package it in bundles, and it would be wrapped in rubber bands. And then they had to get so much. They'd load up the truck. And at the time, I remember my father telling me that, my grandfather, he had a contract with Steinbergs back then. Steinbergs, of course, everyone knows or remembers Steinbergs. They were a big chain of grocery stores. And since then they have gone out of business. I don't know why, but anyway, he had a contract with them to supply X amount of rhubarb on a daily basis. And in order to fulfill that contract, he had to hire people. So there was people that were going there every day. They would pick the rhubarb and then they would bundle it up and put it on the truck. And I remember my father saying, for some reason or other, I don't know what it was, but they weren't allowed to take over the product until after 6 p.m. every day. Whatever that reason was for, I don't know. But that's I remember my father telling me that.
There were many beaches in Kahnawake along the riverfront. One beach belonged to the Sky family. The Skys also rented boats and had a small convenience store to cater to the beachgoers' needs, both from Kahnawake and the surrounding communities. The wrestling matches were crowd pleasers.
My grandfather had a beach on the other side of the tunnel, and I remember people coming there in the summertime from all those communities like La Prairie and Saint-Constant and all that. A lot of cars. And I can remember my uncles having to clean that beach area in the spring. They would have take all the weeds out, you know, and there was always sand there. He had the boats to rent, so people would rent boats and they go fishing or whatever, you know. He had a garden behind his house, so it was a pretty big property. I don't know, I can't tell you how big it was, how many acres, but it was huge. And there was a forest area between his property and the next one over, going towards like the La Prairie area. And then on the other side, that little forest area, there was another beach there. I can't remember the family that was there though, but I know the ones before my father, I think it was Malish, if I remember correctly. They owned that property there.
The riverside, I can recall on a few instances, I remember going to a beach and we'd swim. You know, we didn't know how to swim because we grew up on the farm, but we did like go and sit by the water and getting in the water and, you know, fooling around. We were only little kids, and I can recall one time when there was a big thing in Kahnawake. You know, everybody was it was a big buzz. There was talk about there's going to be a wrestling match. And on the day of the event, I can recall we went to where this beach was, and a wrestling ring was set up, and we were, you know, myself, my friends, a whole bunch of kids, we were all excited, and then when one big car showed up and these guys got out and they seemed so huge, you know, they were the wrestlers. We had, I can recall one wrestler from Kahnawake. I'm pretty sure we had more wrestlers than one at that time, but I can remember his name was the late Buddy Rice. Wrestling was always big in Kahnawake. And when we had the live show there, you know, you couldn't beat that.
There were some community meetings to discuss the Seaway coming through Kahnawake and what that meant. The people talked about how they didn't want to give up or sell their land, the promises made by the government, and how they were warned that the government was planning to take the land anyway.
Well, there would be a truck and a car, a caravan with a loudspeaker and somebody yelling into the loudspeaker or a megaphone. You know, it was an electronic. It was just band meeting tonight, and in the back they had a guy driving a truck and he was banging a drum and also yelling information to everybody. So as he rode around the community several times to notify everyone, then the buzz would begin and the talk would begin.
All through that era, there was a lot of meetings. There was condemnation of the band council. You know, at the time, how come they sold out? They made us sell out, and whether it was true or not, I can't answer that today. I never seen no records of it, the 50s, but I'm sure they were fighting for the rights of the people, but it was a big machine that was after us. It was the American and Canadian government that needed this waterway into the Great Lakes, and at any cost, and the cheapest cost was go to an Indian reserve. They could have done it in a river, they could have done it on the north side, they could have widened the Lachine Canal. There was already a canal there. Why didn't they do that? But no, they came on our land and they destroyed our way of life for their purpose. We didn't gain nothing from the Seaway. Economically, even to this day, we have not a penny. We don't have nothing to show for taking all that land and all that riverfront from us.
I was aware of small meetings where the community said we wanted to do something about it, and where the government people, of course, had made an invitation that they were going to come and explain it. You know, Lionel Chevrier, who was the Minister of Transport at that point in time, came to Kahnawake and met at the old up the hill poking fire, my Aunt Louise's longhouse, and they had a meeting there. I hadn't attended that meeting, but I know that that's where people opposed it, and this gentleman made some promises about beautifying the rill and giving us two Olympic-sized swimming pools, some to that effect, and at that point in time, we were opposing it, and when we do that, we make the mistake of not recording this. You know, well, we didn't have recorders, but written down and getting letters written to that effect, and we didn't. We just didn't. Well, there were two of these meetings that he came to try to explain, but people continuously opposed it.
And he asked if they would give their consent for the Seaway to be built through Kahnawake, and it was a collective no. So he went back, I regrouped himself and called for another meeting, and that's the same question again. Then he got another no. Now Plan B came into place, and then they pulled out these certificates of possession that each landowner had.
The Canadian government had a plan to get the land away from individual Kahnawake Ronu. First, they wanted to know who and where families were located. The government referred to these people as locatees and issued them location tickets. Then they determined that since the people were not only located on those tracts of land, but that they were also occupying the land, the location tickets became certificates of occupation. Eventually, the government-issued certificates of occupation became the certificates of possession.
The history of the certificates of possession was an ulterior motive move by the federal government knew that they would never get consent of the collectivity to put the Seaway through. So they had already foreseen the resistance that were there, and what they had put into the Indian Act on their ability to expropriate waterways on reserves, which was basically only Kahnawake that came under that category. Only Kahnawake. Even today, you look anywhere else, that law or that amendment to the Indian Act was made for us. So they had already figured out a legal way of justifying their actions by saying they were going after individuals that own the property and that those people can be expropriated under the Indian Act. It served the purpose well. We lost our land.
And it was something that it was gradually, I would say, forced on our people, because we were threatened all the time. You know, here I am living on a piece of land, and then while the government comes along and says, well, you know, to make our plan so that we can finance this and finance that, we have to know where your land is located, so we'll know. And then the next time they come around, they said, well, some people are occupying their land, some people are not, but, you know, are you? So they gave certificate of occupation. Oh, you're occupying it. And then the crowning point was that when they said, well, now we don't only want to know what you occupy, but you possess the land, you know. And in their term, possession is own it. I possess it, you know. Like, oh, well, you possess it. And we say, well, you possess it to be used. But in their term, possess it is that you don't have to consider anybody else, so it's yours.
Certificates of possession really became an issue with the expropriation of Seaway lands, both common as well as privately held property. Prior to that, it wasn't an issue, at least it was something that people always said, please don't ever get a certificate of possession. And it was when the Seaway came through is when, you know, they said, well, you have to have something that says it's your land. And therefore they came out with these. These already existed. It wasn't something new that was developed. It was already existed. It was in the Indian Act, and they said, no, you have to have a certificate of possession in order us to buy the land from you or expropriate it and pay you.
And according to the Indian Act, they could expropriate the land, you know, for waterways, and that they could go after each individual as a landowner. They broke the collectivity, so to speak, and so there was the community could not say no as one. So they plucked each individual off and took the land and gave them whatever they wanted for it.
By 1956, there seemed to be a lot of confusion, fear, and mistrust in the minds and the hearts of the townspeople over what was happening at the riverside. Some families were coerced into giving up their land.
All I heard was that if somebody had sold the land and they had set a precedent, and that we were all screwed, which I didn't even know what that meant at the time, you know, why we're being screwed. Because again, there was no physical Seaway to look at. I mean, if we'd seen drawings where it was going to go and see it and realize how much anger it would cause, because I mean, you could see it in people's faces. It was like there was a misunderstanding. There was no respect. The government came in and didn't respect anybody's rights. They just said, we're taking your land. It's in the Indian Act. It says we can expropriate your land. And I didn't even know what the word expropriate meant. But it was more of interest than really knowing what the effects would be again on us and to the people. I mean, the elders, the people that were 70, 80 years old, if they lived that long, they didn't know what was going on either. They just knew that the land was being devoured by these giant cranes and dynamited all the time.
I was out there one day when this negotiator came, and he was talking there in the yard, talking to my mother and my father. And it was my mother's land, and he gave her an ultimatum. He says, Mrs. Two Rivers, you take what we're offering you now for this piece of property where we're taking a toilet, we're taking a well, we're taking a barn, and we're taking a bit of a garden, we're taking 40 feet of your property. This is how much you're going to get. Well, he says, no, I'm not selling, I'm not taking it. Well, he says, look, Mrs. Two Rivers, he said, if you don't accept what I'm offering you now, when this thing is finished and gone through, we don't know if you'll get anything. She was standing there, she was crying. She says, Tom, what am I going to do? He says, oh no, he says, well, he says, I guess we better take what we're getting because we might not get anything, you know. And so this is what I remember happening, and I don't have fond memories of that.
While some Kahnawake families gave in to government pressure to sell their land, at least one family stuck it out till the end.
When the Seaway came, well, it's like my father was not consulted in any way. Everybody knew, the adults knew, well, this is what was happening. The Seaway was coming. And then people fought it. People didn't want to sell. They wouldn't sign their land. They didn't want to sell.
We knew, we heard about it, but we didn't believe there was going to.
There was, in fact, one man, one family, well, it was the man. He stood his ground. And his house was basically located in the path of the current Seaway, east of the Mercier Bridge. He refused. He told him, no, I don't want your money, I don't want this. I'm not signing anything. I ain't moving. And they were afraid. The developers, as we have to call them, because it was a consortium, you know, the US, Canada, Quebec, and so on, that financed all this. So they, you know, I don't think they were scared to their boots, but I think he did put them in a quandary. In any case, they decided to just continue, and they went around him. They actually went right around him, and he continued living there till he basically had he was sitting on an island like a pig.
Well, I'm aware of one family. He stayed right in his house until they dug the land around him. He was left on an island. Eventually, he was obliged to move. Otherwise, his house would have caved in.
They had a little farmhouse. They lived in there, and they refused. An old couple. And finally, one day, I guess it was the police. I don't know. We'd have to look in the picture who went. They went and they took them out of that house. They put planks, and they took them out of that house and they walked them across the planks. They took them, and then the big giant machines came and just plowed it in, steamrolled it in. That was the end of their home.
The family was an elderly couple, Mr. and Mrs. Louis Diabo. They were the grandparents of Roy Currat, and they were one of the last families in Kahnawake to move from their home after being harassed to make way for the Seaway.
As far back as I can remember was my grandparents on the farm up near where the Sorrel School is, in that area in the back. That's where we grew up. Well, they were the last ones in that whole area on both sides of they were the last ones to hold out. They would not move out. They would not leave their land. They used to sit in the house, and he would farm what little parts he had left, and he would work at with his horses and. And just held out, but everything else was dug up right up to the fence. I remember, and they got even the Seaway people used to try to burn the farm. A few times they tried to burn the barn down. Because one of my cousins had caught a guy and carrying these what they call. I don't know if you ever seen them. They call them road bombs. They're just round buckets they use with kerosene, and they used to use them for marking along the highway at one time. And he was carrying those and coming up near the barn there, and they caught him there, and they had a discussion about carrying. Fuel around the barn. So I just heard stories about what happened to him, but I don't know how true it is. It's a funny story. There are pictures of I've seen them where government officials and government people were, they were escorting them off. Once the check was finally cut, here's your money, now get out. And I guess other than that, I don't really remember any details on how they actually were. When they left, that's all I remember hearing. That they were escorted out. They even brought them to their other house here in the village.
Compensation for privately held land was not widely disclosed. Indian Affairs maintained that the transactions were made between themselves and the landowners, and the amounts were confidential. Monies received for common land were more accessible.
The place it's not clear is who set the amount on what the community interest was, and they always say it was some bureaucrat somewhere that probably pulled a number out of a hat and said this is the community interest. So they got so much in a settlement. I think it was $1 million and some odd on the amount of money that was given for the public interest in the land.
After expropriating the land, the sludge from the Seaway construction was used to fill in Kahnawake's islands across from Johnson's Beach to create one large island, and was also used to make the Clay Mountains and the North Wall.
It was west of the where the present water system is in Kahnawake, in the western part of where everybody will know before the water system was a hospital there. Well, it was just west of that. There were islands located facing what is now known as Johnson's Beach. It became Tekakwitha Island. Yeah, they filled in the islands and they connected them all together and they made it a large island, which you know, if you look at that island, it's a large island, but really we got back the whole thing, except, you know, even the road that we ride on now to get to the marina belongs to the St. Lawrence Seaway, because they own, I think, 50 feet from the Seaway for maintenance purposes, stuff like that.
Other than the way we live, the land, the islands were beautiful. By Johnson's Beach, right across, you look at the land, it was beautiful. The islands were there, and it was like one big thing that took place almost all year long. And then to look at it now, all you see was rock after that. It was just gone. And though at that time too, our lifestyle was completely different. Whereas at the time, and I was young, I told my mother where I was going to Johnson's Beach.
It's still vacant across the Seaway, but I know my grandmother and her sisters owned what they call Cattery Island now, to where the marina for people where the powwow is. But now, when the Seaway came through, they made just the rock, just the plain rocks, you know, big rocks. They just filled the whole thing in, and they covered all the islands, and they made one big island. Now there's a little bridge that goes across there, and the marina's built at that far end. But they took away all the natural habitat for people. They didn't do nothing to preserve what we had. They took away a way of life of a whole people.
There's two clay mountains, right? One is where there's houses built on right now, and then one is further east where the survival school area is, and that used to be farmland. So they just dump it there. And of course, whatever else they dug up, they use it to form the wall we call the North Wall now.
It's plain to see that the river was the center of village life in Kahnawake, and the construction of the Seaway forever changed the lives of Kahnawake for all time to come. The impacts on the community were many, and the future is somewhat ominous.
I know a lot of times my children will ask me questions and they want to know what it was like. They'll never know that. And they know that, you know, and I think it makes them sad. It makes them, and I wish I could show them, you know, what it was like, but you can't, you know, it's gone, and you know, like when somebody dies, how it affects the whole family, and it's the same thing. It's the same kind of a grieving that we've all experienced, and it doesn't go away. It never does, you know. How do you fix that, you know? There's no way.
I'm able to reflect back at that to where we're at and looking at it that it doesn't exist anymore. And sometimes I still think about it. I know, you know, it would have been nice for people to see. It was like a freedom that we had. We were free. We didn't have all these things, restrictions and whatnot. And it's a time that just, you know, it's gone, and just a memory.
Well, I know they can't fill it up, but we're investing. But you know, economically, I think that the government of the world, including the U.S. and the Canadian governments, and all these ships that go through owe us something for what they've done to us. And I think that there has to be a plan worked out, not just take somebody's land, move them on, and like that's the Canadian way. You know, but the Canadian way always takes the poorest people's land. No matter where it is, it's never the rich people that get moved. It's always the poor people. And I don't call that equal or a democracy. I call that a dictatorship.
Well, the way I look at it, we have a lot of problems today. And with drugs, alcohol, and all that, and just like, it's just totally out of hand. And I feel that's a part of it too, is because people lost their spirit over there. They left it over there. And then it's like generational. Each generation has that same, they're lost, you know, and they have that same kind of lifeless existence because there's no more river. It's a constant reminder. You know, every time you hear the boat or you look, you see the bridge going up, it just reminds you of what, it's like you never forget what happened. It's always there. It never lets you forget.
But why can't we benefit from it? The whole world is in fact generating revenues crossing our lands and basically ignoring what they see as they come through our lands. But we see and we feel it, and it'll never go away in reality, and the pain will never go away either in our hearts. And I think someday, if we can regain access somehow to it and develop some of the lands that have been destroyed or remain distant from us, if we can at least have some of that back, it would go a long way into making amends about the St. Lawrence Seaway and the destruction it caused on Kahnawake.
Oh, I put it in the back of my mind. I don't think of it anymore.
It's an eyesore. It's a detriment to us. It's a bother. It's not doing anything for us. It's something that we always have to be careful about. You know, are the ships going to hit each other? Are the ship carrying some kind of explosives going to blow up? Is it going to hit the bridge? Is it going to drop oil and pollute the water? Is it bringing in strange sea creatures from other parts that are going to damage the water, our river, which was originally called the Great River of the Iroquois, you know, and then they changed the name to St. this and whatever. That's our river, and so we're never sure what's going to happen with that seaway there. You know, it's good for, like I say, little children come over there, oh, look at the big ship, you know, but maybe by our talking like that our young people can see and vision what was there before.
Kahnawake means by the rapids. The essence of even our name was taken away by the building of the St. Lawrence Seaway, when it separated our people from our way of life. The two-row wampum represents a canoe and a ship, parallel to one another in separate territories. Ironically, ships now sail right through our territory all day long, and the seaway walls remain physical reminders of the barriers that were put in place between who we are and who we once were. As a result of the seaway, Kahnawake Hronu stand together in a common saying, "Not one more inch," in reference to the fact that we will not surrender what is left of our territory and will continue to fight to get back what we have lost as a people.